pops up when you unmute. Good evening. My name is Carolyn Sullivan. I'm co-owner at Sullivan Violins along with my husband, Ken Sullivan. And I want to thank you for joining us for our first ever live streaming event from Sullivan Violins. Tonight's program was inspired by Joseph Staten, tonight's cellist. Joseph, like many musicians during COVID, has had limited ability to perform and play these beautiful instruments. He asked if we'd be willing to host a live stream event and make it a fundraiser. We thought this would be just a great idea. And what better fundraiser, what better nonprofit than ROCmusic to support at this time? ROCmusic provides tuition-free lessons to children in the city of Rochester. We know that children in Rochester are facing so many challenges right now. And helping ROCmusic is a positive way we can directly impact the children of our city. Based on the proven LC STEMMA model, ROCmusic offers each child 4 to 5 hours of music lessons per week, as well as providing instruments and maintenance, free of charge. ROCmusic leverages the incredible musical resources we have in our community. Supported by the Eastman School of Music, Hochstein, City of Rochester, and the Rochester Philharmonic. It's a barrier-breaking program that's designed to instill a love of learning, responsibility, respect, and academic success. This year has considerable challenges for education, and ROCmusic is offering children the opportunity to learn in person, hybrid, or remote, with caring adults and mentors. Tonight, you're going to get a tour of wines, instruments, sounds, and tastes. I'm pleased to have my dear friend and sommelier, Joe Ellis, share with us his knowledge of 2 wines. You'll also get a tasting of 2 violins and 2 cellos. An expert panel, including master luthier Ken Sullivan, will discuss the nuances of each instrument. Now, if you have questions during the program, please feel free to leave them in the comments section of our live stream. We'll do our best to respond either during or following the program. Finally, I want to thank all of you who have already donated and are joining us for the wine tasting portion of our program. We're so pleased that we have completely sold out of wine, exceeding our initial goal of $1,800, and we've already raised $1,975. So we're $25 away from $2,000. I'm sure we can cross that goal tonight. We'd love to make this a great success for ROCmusic, so as you listen, please consider a donation, or if you've already donated, an additional donation to ROCmusic. You can donate directly at ROCmusic.org. You can also send us a message via Facebook with any donation amount that you've given, so we can keep track of how we're doing. If you'd like to have us process a donation for us, just send us a Facebook message or email us at info@sullivanviolins.com with your pledge amount and phone number. We'll call you next week and we'll get your donation processed. And finally, I'd like to thank our co-sponsors, both Pinnacle Wine and Liquor, as well as Joe Ellis and his incomparable wife, Dr. Deb Curley. Tonight's program would not have been possible without their support. So I don't want to keep you away from yummy tasting wine and wonderful sounding instruments, so I want to welcome Joe Ellis.
Strange to be sitting here without an audience. You'll have to excuse me as I get used to this. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's really exciting to be here and having an opportunity to taste wine with people, even virtually. The wines, it's like, yet again, I'm at a party in which I have really no business attending, but since I bring the wine, I get to come along. Tonight, we're going to be tasting a couple of wines from the Veneto region of Italy, so the northeast of Italy provides these wines, and I think it's appropriate when thinking about music and wine. This actually fits really well in the history of music. The region brought us the music of Monteverdi, of Vivaldi. And so also beautiful are the wines of the region. The first wine we're going to taste is the white wine that you have. It is from Domini Veneti, a producer who has been creating some incredible wines for the region for the past 30 years, which doesn't seem like a long time when you're talking about Italian wines, but this is actually a collective group. So the winemakers and the wines are actually coming from much older estates. The first wine, as I said, is the Suave from Domini Veneti. When you taste it, you're going to find that this white wine is not easily characterized by other wines. No, it's got more body than Sauvignon Blanc. It's not as light, as those wines, but it's not as heavy as some of the bigger Chardonnays of the world. And I find it to be incredibly appealing wine. The downfall for Suave, or perhaps the reason people know Suave is if you like me, go back into the 80s, the producer Bola created just a gazillion gallons of Suave, and it was mass marketed as one of the largest imported wines in the U.S. And so it was not unusual for a Suave to be on every wine list and to be consumed at homes routinely. Not always the best of wines, but what I found with this wine is it sort of brings back that love of the region. And so hopefully you've got your bottle open, hopefully it's chilled, and you're getting to enjoy it, and maybe even waited until this very moment to try it. But I'm going to give this a try. So what I love about this is it's crisp, it's got great acidity to it, making your mouth water, wanting another drink of the wine or a little bit of food. Hopefully you have some things to nibble on while you're enjoying the music tonight. I'm happy to take questions about this online later, and I hope you enjoy this. I hope you enjoy the program put on by the incredible musicians. And finally, I want to thank Matt Yeager of Pinnacle Wine and Liquor for making these wines available to us tonight. And also, if you find that you would like to get more of the wine, they will be carrying it there at the store. So please feel free to drop by there and continue enjoying these wines. And without further ado, I will pass the baton to the next part of the program.
Hello, I'm Kenneth Sullivan, and I'm here with my friends Ike Ito and Ben Magruder, both of the Rochester Philharmonic. Terrific people and terrific musicians. We're very lucky to have you both. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Ken. Happy to be here.
Thank you for having us.
We're going to talk about, in the violins and cellos later, we have one old instrument and one new instrument. We're going to start today with an instrument by George Crask, an English maker, made sometime around 1870. George Crask was a very interesting man. He was born in 1795 and died in 1888. So he lived a long life, especially for a person at that time period. He had great training from William Forster III and then a couple of other shops that he worked at in the London area. He traveled around, he lived in 5 different cities and worked in 5 different cities during his long career. In Bath, he met some leading musicians who helped him to further his career and acted as patrons for him. He then went on to Birmingham in the late 1820s or early 1830s, and in 1831 he met Paganini on his last tour of England. It was fortuitous for him. Paganini needed some repairs on his Del Gesù violin. That's Joseph Guarnerius Del Gesù, is also called the Canon. When he repaired it, he successfully repaired it, and Paganini went on to finish his performances. but he was able to make patterns of this violin. And what I find very fascinating is that I've only seen one instrument that was not a Del Gesù pattern from George Krask. He made two sizes of violins. The smaller one, which is patterned after the original size of most Guarneri's, about 350 millimeters in length. That's the length from here to here. This one is the bigger model. They are identical. It's just like it's blown up into a bigger size. I've seen him and sold a viola, exactly the same, just blown up into a viola size, and also I've seen a cello, and they're all identical. He was so consistent. He just was enamored with the Del Gesù pattern. His varnish is this is very typical. It's kind of a reddish brown varnish with amber undertones, amber grounds. You can see the Guarneri F-holes here. And he's remarkably consistent with his channeling, everything. What we look at as violin makers, we look at the scooping of the F-holes and how it relates to the channeling here, and then in the scroll, and he's very consistent. It really shows the hand of a master. Also, at that time in history, people in England, makers in England, were still copying Jacobus Steiner, who was a very famous German maker, and his instruments tend to be quite highly arched, and that high arch made for a very pretty, sweet sound, which was very good if you were a nobleman and you had a music room with 50 people. But as halls became bigger and people expected a larger sound, that sound kind of diminished. It wasn't able to spread and then carry through the hall. So what Krask did is he adopted a little bit flatter model, a lot more like Guarneri's usually are. And this allowed for a great amount of production of sound that really, hitherto really didn't exist in a lot of those instruments from that time period.
But what I find really interesting about this instrument is even though, like you were just describing, it projects very well, probably because of the way that it was made, it still has a very warm and tender sound. It just carries across the room. Would you agree with that, Aika?
Yeah, that's what I love about this instrument. It's very warm and vibrant, woody.
Yeah, it has a really nice quality of shimmering overtones on top of a warmer, deeper sound, and the combination of the two ends up making just something that's very sweet and can sound very intimate, but I wouldn't call it quiet or anything approaching that. Can you talk about what it feels like to play this instrument?
Yeah, I just personally I love warm sound of the violin, so I just really love this kind of sound. So I'm going to play a piece called Meditation by Thais. And then this piece is about lady encountering the monk, and then he tells her she needs to start believing in God and then find a peace instead of having life with a lot of distractions and just focusing on the too much joy. And then that's such a beautiful moment in the opera that she finds the peace in herself as the first time. So when I use this instrument, I can express the intimate feeling of the lady, but also very warm and then peaceful sound. So
yeah, absolutely.
that's what I love about this.
So something that I to speak about that reaction. These instruments like this I always think of as silky or buttery or creamy. And that relates to how it's played, not as quite as much how it sounds, but that's what makes playing something like that the perfect instrument. Why don't we move on to having you play it?
Sure.
for sharing that. Well, we're going to look at the second instrument here. So, as it turns out, this is one that I actually made. And you're going to see a theme here. This is actually a Guarneri model also. Guarneri is one of my favorite makers in the Cremonese school. He was the fourth of 5 generations of Guarneri family members, all who lived in the same town as Antonio Stradivari and Niccolo Amati. The interesting thing about Del Gesù, he's the only contemporary rival of Stradivari. And though he was Cremonese, he adopted really as his modeling a little bit rounder archer. We call it a football arch. And that's a Brescian innovation. The F-holes are not really Cremonese F-holes. They're really based more on Giovanni Paolo Maggini, who was a Brescian, one of the 2 great Brescian makers. So he kind of went his own way, which is really quite different than most of the other Cremonese makers. He lived a short life, died in his 40s, but his instruments are known as being very sonorous and very strong sounding. A lot of times you'll hear great violinists say, this person is a Strad person, this person is a Guarneri person. They have different characteristics. I think Guarneris tend to be kind of out there in your face, and Strads are more meldable maybe in some ways. Generically speaking, they're all a little bit different. Obviously, each individual instrument is different. What I aimed for with this instrument was something that could be clear and strong sounding. And I do that in, first thing is the selection of wood. I use good alpine spruce and then beautiful, this is red maple, this is Native American maple, which is from New York State actually, which is every bit as good as Bosnian maple. They're almost identical. You can't really differentiate them too easily. And Bosnian maple is considered the benchmark wood in the world for violin family instruments. The models are fairly flat, as I was saying before on the last one. That's a typical part of Del Gesù. Stradivari in his later years, his golden age, his instruments tend to be flatter also. Early on, they tend to be a little bit more highly arched. So my aim here was to use all these ideas, a little flatter arch, and then selection of wood and graduation thickness in particular that would direct the sound and produce a clear and beautiful sound, but still give it power.
Yeah, and from what I've heard of this instrument, playing it, and also this was from talking with Ike, I think this was her response. It seems like that's exactly what she achieved with this instrument. It's got a very clear and sweet tone. Projects very, very well, very, very quick response, but a little bit in contrast to the crafts which we just heard. This is going to be slightly on the brighter side, but that was slightly on the darker side. Neither one of these instruments would I classify as extremely dark or bright, but we're just talking sort of generally leaning. This instrument is what I would describe a little bit more as pure, whereas I would describe the crafts a little bit more as vibrant, or some people would say textured, or color tone, or something of that nature. But I would call this instrument very pure, clear, bright, sweet. What is your experience playing this instrument, Rebecca?
I just love the combination of the powerful focus sound with the warm tone, because you don't want anything too crunchy or too much.
Right.
Yeah, but this has such a beautiful balance of everything.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, like, when you make violin, like, what is your technique, like working with the wood, and then learning from the past violins made, but then creating your own instrument?
Well, of course, all of that, yes. When we're working with wood, we're feeling constantly the pliability and movability of the plates when they're separated, and how over the length, how well they move this way and that way, and all these things really affect it pretty dramatically. You don't want to have it really stick this way and then loose this way, because you're not going to get the right overtones and quantities of sounds. So we look at all those things, and that comes from experience, basically. So, and then thinking what you want the sound to be like. You should know what it's going to sound like before you set it up, actually. At least that's what we try.
There's a little bit of magic there as well, right?
It's a little fudge there.
Yeah.
So you
Well,
can feel the wood from your hand and then just from your experience.
well, so why don't we hear this violin?
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to play a piece called Childish by Monty. This is like Hungarian dance, so it has like really deep character, but it also staccato part. This has really good response, so I really enjoy playing this piece. for this instrument, which has a little bit different character. It's called Sultan by Elgar. So he wrote this piece as a celebration of his engagement with his wife. So it's like really, really sweet. And then this instrument has such a quality that I love this brightness and the sweetness and then the combination of both. So I hope you enjoy this piece.
have to say that's an impossible act to follow. Fortunately, again, I brought the wine, so I get to give it my best shot. Wow. Yeah, as the person with the least amount of talent in the room, I bring you the other wine this evening. So, again, from the same region, but a red wine this time. So, within the Veneto region in Italy, there are multiple smaller regions within. So, the first wine we had was a Soave. It's actually produced in the Soave region. That's why it says Classico on the label. It's the Classico region, Soave. Valpolicella is its own region. These little communities are actually located near the city of Verona. Valpolicella you'll see on a lot of different styles of wine. It's produced using the same grapes generally, so you'll see Corvina and Rondinella and Molinara as the makeup of a lot of these wines, but the style in which they're produced changes them around. So this wine that we're tasting, the Valpolicella Classico, is going to be Valpolicella in its simplest, most pure form. So instead of a lot of extra manipulation and changing of the wine, this wine is produced as wine generally are. It's going to be fermented grape juice. It's going to be aged for a little while in barrels that are not going to be putting a lot of their flavors into the wine. It doesn't need oak flavors to flavor it. You'll find that regular Valpolicella Classicos are are lighter red wines. They're going to have lots of nice acidity. From a more traditional, so wine that people will know more, it's going to be very similar in a way to Pinot Noir, but definitely its own wine. And so you'll find, let's try this out actually. So, a lot of cherries on the nose. Light, crisp, really nice, red fruit to it. Just a really enjoyable wine to have with, certainly food of the region. You would think things like tomato sauces, obviously, this would go beautifully with mushrooms, with lighter meat dishes as well. But to not think about that alone, the other thing I'd like to mention is the fact that Valpolicella, you'll see other ways. You'll see Ripasso di Valpolicella, which is going to be a wine that's going to have a little bit more depth to it. And what's happened is that the red wine has been combined with used, raisinated grapes from another wine that's also labeled with Valpolicella, the Amarone. So, starting from the simple Valpolicella Classico to the Ripasso, then to Amarone, which is made from half-dried grapes, which tends to be a much more expensive, much richer style wine, and definitely worth checking out. But it's amazing that this one region, this group of grapes, will produce such a wide range of wines. So hopefully this introduction to the region, to these wines, will get you interested. It's honestly the region that first turned me on to wine. As a teenage kid sitting at my grandparents' table, the first red wine I drank was some of that bowl of Valpolicella I mentioned earlier. I tried to come up with a good joke that, talk about Valpolicella or violin and cello. My wife and son both grown, and so maybe not do it, so I won't, to save you. However, your next section of music is coming up, so enjoy this wine, enjoy the music, and have a great evening.
Hello again, and I'd like to now introduce Joe Staten, a great cellist.
Hello.
Just welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. It's great to be supporting such a great cause and learning about wine, learning about instruments. I've certainly learned a lot past few days talking with you and this instrument and the next one.
Well, it's the kind of profession that we never stop learning, right?
So,
Both as
yeah.
musicians, as makers, as repairmen, we never stop learning. There's always something new that comes down.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it. With this instrument, we have Carl Vandermeer. This is a very interesting cello. I had been aware of him as a maker of bows, and when this cello came in, I really started to become aware of him as a maker. He really was known as a maker of instruments. Vandermeer was actually a member, a violinist, in the Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra, and which is, of course, world famous and still exists. At the age of about 30, he left the orchestra to pursue a career in violin making. He was very successful, the best of the modern Dutch makers, and a number of renowned makers went through his shop and worked with him, or at least studied with him. This particular model of cello is actually a Strad model. In researching him, he usually worked off of a Guarneri model, so this is a little bit unusual for him. But he was well versed in the construction. The Stradivari model really is a nice model for musicians. It's a little bit smaller than some other models, and Stradivari was making these probably following Francesco Ruggeri's model, which is a smaller model. Most people were making bigger models at that time, and this really became one of the predominant models. It's easier to get around. The string length, everything is very manageable for musicians. His selection of wood here, it always starts with the wood selection, and it's beautiful alpine spruce here. It's very moderate grain width. It's not even extended. A lot of times we'll see very wide grains over here. This is much more consistent all the way across. Very good for production of sound. The arching he chose is a very classic late model Stradivari arching, not too high. Beautiful production of sound that comes from being able to force the diaphragm of the top. The back, ribs and neck, a beautiful figured maple.
That's my favorite part.
Isn't that beautiful?
Stunning.
So, and this would probably be Bosnian maple, that type of maple. Certainly, it's not native. This would not be like an Italian maple. This would be more of a Balkan maple type thing, or from Germany in the Alps. Beautiful two-piece back with descending pattern for the flames on both sides. This is what we call a book-matched. It's what we call a book-matched pair. A triangle taken out of the tree, cut in half, and then split apart so that each side is the same. Beautiful ribs that match, and a nice, beautiful brown varnish with an amber undertone, which just is a very warm color.
So can you talk a little bit what it feels like to play this cello?
Yeah, my first impression when I played it here in the shop was, wow, this is bright and very powerful, and you know we get sound immediately, even just from touching the string. Almost, it seems like the cello wants to go. It's like a thoroughbred racehorse. It just comes out of the stable, and it just is not playing around in terms of projection and sound. Because it's an old instrument, the what might be harsh in a newer instrument, the brightness, this instantaneous response, almost a grit to the sound, has mellowed out over time. And we'll find that a lot with older instruments, especially ones that have been played on well. What's great is that this is in great condition, and it's also very easy to play on. So if I mean, the low end is very powerful. The mids have a beautiful quality, and if we go higher up on the cello, we can find an array of different colors the cello sings effortlessly. And so I found it just generally a very joy to play on. It's a lovely instrument.
Fantastic. Now, so something that came up in our violin conversation that I wanted to talk a little bit about, and make sure I made a point about it with the cellos as well, is the concept of focused sound.
Yeah.
And to me, the contrast of focused is open sound. Some people say broad sound.
Mm-hmm.
The easiest way for me to understand focus is the vowel sound that I hear when I hear an instrument being played. Is it more like an E? Is it more like an O? Is it someplace in between?
Yeah.
To me, this cello is a little bit more on the focused side, which is what brings up these ideas of like, you know, projection of power on top of volume. It's like the combination of volume and focused that really gets that penetration for me.
Yeah, well, yeah, very well put. This, I think, might be more on the E side in some aspects, like you said. And
it's not all the way. I mean, it's not
No.
as focused. It's not. It's more like an A sound, but
right, yeah, like
Yeah.
you know, you go to the Midwest and they say egg, they don't
Yeah.
say egg, they say
yeah,
egg.
A. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah, but yeah, it is a very focused sound. It is a sound that definitely cuts through very well. It would be a great instrument for a budding recitalist or a soloist, and it really stands out to me. But that's a good thing you pointed out.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, why don't we hear it?
Sure. So I'll start with the Courant from the first cello suite by Johann Sebastian Bach, and I thought this piece highlighted again the really fantastic response of the instrument and the timbre in general. Piece I'll play is the Sarabande, which is a slow dance movement from the third cello suite by Bach. very lucky to be able to play on such nice instruments. So thank you again for having me here.
Our pleasure. Well, we're going to go to number 2 here.
Ready? Back there. Sorry, my little thing is on back there.
Well, as you can see, this is a new instrument. It's quite bright, shiny, beautiful instrument. This is made by my good friend Ray. This is made by my good friend Ray Melanson, who, interestingly, lives in Rochester, Massachusetts, near the Cape. This is a copy of a Guarneri del Gesù cello that he was able to get his whole hands on and pattern. It's the only Del Gesù cello known to exist. And it was discovered in the past 20 or 30 years, and Ray was able to take careful patterns of it, and pretty much every cello he made since then has been based on that pattern. You can see the typical Guarneri Del Gesù F holes here. Again, this is more of a Brescian design, but and a little bit different than a so typical Cremonese style. The wood he chose, very even grain spruce and beautiful, beautiful figured maple. This is red maple also. This comes from Vermont, I believe. Ray actually had the good fortune of buying a whole tree. So many of his instruments now are coming from that tree. A beautiful figured maple in a descending pattern. Some of you might ask how we get those patterns. So the tree, instead of growing straight up and down, it kind of weaves in and out. Nobody really knows why, whether it's snow on a limb or stony soil that it grows in. But when you cut across those waves, this is the effect that you get. Yeah, it's an unusual product, but you can see he's been very consistent. He chose wood that he could go all the way through, even in the scroll. We've sold a number of his instruments, and he's made, I think this is close to 100 cellos now, which is a lot of cellos. It's a lot of hard work. Beautiful red, reddish, brown, orange, oil varnish, aptly applied but not over applied, so that it enhances the sound without diminishing it, and it protects the instrument, which is what we look for in varnishes.
So can you talk a little bit about what it feels like to play this cello, especially in comparison to the Vandermeer?
Well, this is another instrument that I've come to become very fond of. You know, like I said with the Vandermeer, often with new instruments, it's difficult to develop a relationship with the instrument because it has to be broken in. I didn't really run into too many, if any, of those kinds of issues with this. It's a beautiful instrument. I mean, appearances-wise, I found it very attractive, and to play, it's easy. It's just very easy. A different kind of sound than the Vandermeer. It has a more, there's more of a darkness to it as opposed to the brightness of the Vandermeer. There's a kind of warmth that you get all throughout the instrument, as you'll hear, yeah, just generally very, very easy to play and very predictable. And yeah, I've really enjoyed playing on this. You know, doing my scales with this instrument, playing it for other people, and definitely showing off the back because it's really something else.
Yeah, that's something I've encountered with newer instruments versus old instruments occasionally is that the sometimes older instruments can be a little bit temperamental in a certain way.
Yeah.
Sometimes you take them out of the case, you feel like you have to warm them up or wake them up, whereas sometimes I find that new instruments are just a little bit quicker in that particular sense. And of course, that's not all the time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But so this to contrast against the Vandermeer, this is also an instrument that I found to be a little bit more on the open sound, open side, so a little bit more of an O vowel, combining with that warm, kind of chocolatey quality. And yeah, just beautiful. So what are you going to play for us?
Well, I'm going to play 2 movements of the second Bach cello suite and the first movement of the solo sonata by Georgi Ligeti. So I'll start with the Bach. It's the first movement of the Ligeti sonata.
the first time, so, you know, everything's new in this new world. And if you haven't done so yet, please consider browsing right over ROCmusic.org and making a donation. We can lift up Rochester and children in Rochester today. And I want to personally thank all people who have helped us with this event. It was a kind of a complicated idea, and it took a lot of people to pull it together. I want to thank Armin Hall, Executive Director, Artistic Director of ROCmusic, who was extremely helpful to us. I want to thank Ben Magruder, our audio engineer, Emily Cook, our director, who is sitting behind the camera there. I also, of course, want to thank Doris, Joseph and for their contribution. And I also want to thank my husband and Sullivan for sharing his insights about instrument making, and also to our Sullivan Violins employees who helped, specifically Samantha Smith, who many of you may have spoken to, processing their donations. She got everything completely organized and made this whole thing happen. I also want to thank David Howe, who personally probably drove the perimeter of Monroe County delivering wine yesterday. And finally, I'd like to thank our co-sponsors again, Matt Yeager from Pinnacle Wine and Liquor, and Joe Ellis and Dr. Deb Curley, who helped make this possible. We're all done, but Joseph has offered to do an encore. So you can sit around, sip your wine, enjoy some great music while we just close out the program. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. We appreciate it.